All right, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into something absolutely crucial for our field, understanding BABOK as the professional standard. We're talking about taking business analysis from a reactive, kind of fly-by-the-seat-of-your-pants habit and turning it into a highly structured, totally scalable science. Let's get right into it.
Okay, let's dive into this. Have you ever felt the absolute pain of working purely from sheer instinct? Without a standard, we just end up relying on habit. And honestly, it gets chaotic, fast. Everyone kind of has their own quirky, idiosyncratic way of doing things. But when we apply defined principles and techniques, we finally bring structure to that chaos. We get a shared methodology. It is literally the difference between just hoping for a good outcome and actually engineering one. And that right there brings us to the Business Analysis Body of Knowledge, or as we all know it, the BABOK Guide. Now, this isn't just a heavy reference book gathering dust on a shelf. It acts as the ultimate tool for standardizing our work. It gives us a shared professional language, which is a total game changer. It shifts business analysis from this sort of mystical art form known by a few into a solid, repeatable practice that an entire team can rally around.
So, just a quick background. Developed by the International Institute of Business Analysis, this globally recognized guide defines the core competencies, the tasks, and the absolute best practices of the field. And crucially, it fuels career growth. It supports major industry certifications like the ECBA, CCBA, and CBAP. Basically, it provides a universal benchmark for what good analysis actually looks like across the entire industry.
Now, what's really interesting about this next part is how it organizes our work. Let's break down the first of BABOK's 6 core knowledge areas, planning and monitoring. This is where we lay the groundwork. First up, we define the approach. Are we going agile or maybe waterfall? Second, we lock in the scope and governance, setting those decision-making boundaries. And finally, stakeholder engagement. We plan exactly how we'll keep everyone in the loop so nobody is left in the dark when a project hits a critical phase.
Moving right along, we hit area number 2, elicitation and collaboration. Now, this area is heavily focused on the human element. It's all about rolling up your sleeves and working directly with stakeholders to gather information, confirm our results, and build continuous teamwork. It's absolutely vital because it ensures nothing gets lost in translation between what the business actually needs and what's actually being documented.
Next up is requirements lifecycle management. You can think of this as the cradle-to-grave tracking of business needs. We're managing requirements from their very first spark of inception all the way to retirement. And this is so important because, as we all know, project scope inevitably shifts, right? This process ensures our requirements stay firmly anchored to those actual overarching business goals.
Which naturally brings us to strategy analysis. This is essentially your roadmap for strategic change. It bridges that massive gap between where a business currently sits and where it actually wants to be. So first, you identify the core business needs. Then, you take a hard look and assess the current state against that desired future state. And finally, you plan out the effective solutions needed to actually close that gap.
And that takes us to the 5th area, requirements analysis and design definition. This is where clarity finally meets stakeholder needs. We take all that raw information we've been gathering and we structure it. We're turning abstract, let's be honest, sometimes really messy needs into concrete, actionable design options. We validate and verify everything right here so that the proposed solutions are actually going to be viable in the real world. Finally, we round out the 6 areas with solution evaluation. After all, how do we actually know if a solution succeeded? Well, we assess its performance, we interpret the data, and we recommend corrective measures or optimizations. This is the stage where we prove it's actually delivering real, tangible value for the business.
And this brilliantly illustrates how all these pieces actually fit together. If you look at the cycle, you'll see these aren't just linear steps that you check off one by one and then just forget about. No way. They form a deeply connected, dynamic ecosystem. They're constantly feeding into and informing each other throughout the entire life cycle of a project.
Actually, this quote really nails the core philosophy of the whole framework. Business analysis is a continuous, adaptive cycle, not a one-time checklist. I love that. Good business analysis requires constant, dynamic adaptation. You are always fluidly navigating between planning, eliciting, analyzing, and evaluating as new information inevitably comes to light. So what does this all mean in practice? Let's apply this framework to a few real-world scenarios to see how it actually holds up. Imagine you need to define the high-level scope in goals of automating an invoice approval process. Based on everything we just covered across those 6 areas, where would you say this specific task fits?
If you guessed strategy analysis, you hit the nail on the head. Scoping a new automation goal is all about figuring out how to bridge that gap between a current state, like, say, a painfully slow manual invoice process, and a desired future state of smooth efficiency.
Okay, let's try another one. What about facilitating a workshop with end users to explore pain points in a specific procurement process? Which knowledge area handles this kind of direct, face-to-face human interaction and facilitation?
That one relies squarely on elicitation and collaboration. It ties directly back to actively gathering that crucial information from stakeholders, communicating effectively, and fostering the teamwork you absolutely need to deeply understand those pain points.
All right, let's look at something a little bit more technical. Say you're tasked with analyzing data fields and the logic needed for a new spend dashboard filter design. Which area is covering this specific transition from a broad idea to a strict specification?
For sure, that's requirements analysis and design definition. We're taking those raw requirements and structuring them into very concrete design options, literally modeling the data logic so the development team knows exactly what they need to build.
Okay, for our final scenario, imagine you're performing user acceptance testing. You're validating that the supplier categorization logic works exactly as expected in the new system. We are looking at the back-end validation of an already built solution here. Any guesses?
That points directly to solution evaluation. By mapping out these everyday tasks like this, it becomes so much easier to see how the BABOK standard applies directly to our real-world day-to-day. It completely shifts this from being just a bunch of abstract concepts into a highly practical toolkit.
Bringing it all together, this is ultimately why standardizing our approach matters so incredibly much. Without it, your success depends entirely on individual heroics. And when gaps in delivery happen, and they will, they are incredibly hard to trace or fix. But with BABOK, success becomes totally repeatable and scalable. And when gaps do occur, they can be traced right back to specific knowledge areas, so you know exactly where to make your adjustments.
I want to leave you with one final thought today. Even if we already do our own BA, BABOK gives us one common professional language as we scale and grow with clients. It really makes you think, doesn't it? The question is, are you ready to trade individual instincts for a shared language that actually scales? Keep that in mind as you head back to your own projects. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.